and then I will take some questions at the end. Okay. So we're focusing on under 13s. For those who don't know me, I've been coaching for about the last 30 years and took my level 2, would you believe, in 1994. Those are the days when you didn't have to do a level 1 if you'd played rugby to a certain level. So I went straight to level 2. That was interesting in itself because I'd had so little experience then. Started up Rugby Coach Weekly or Rugby Coach 20 years ago, about this time, 20 years ago. So I've been doing that for a long time. I coached at RGS Guildford, did the under-12s there, under-16s, and then I was director of rugby at Cranley School, did the under-16s and under-18s. And then from about 2006 onwards, I took my son's team through from under-6s through to under-16s. That was in Wales, though. The Welsh model it's not dissimilar to the English model. And at the moment, I am coaching with the Bristol Bears, under 14s, under 15s, under 16s, University of Bristol Women, and doing some other projects in and around that. And also, I tutor quite extensively on the new rules of play. So that's a bit about my background. In this webinar, you'll see that I've got a lot of space on this, so I'm going to be able to write in here and make notes as I go along. So there'll be a few bullet points, but most of it will be me writing as I'm going along. So we're going to focus on the new laws from going up from under 12s to under 13s. We'll talk a little bit about the tackle height, though that's not really a massive issue for your players. Some of the skills that I think will be very good to spend a little bit more time thinking about. This is a moment where tactics will play a part, and we're going to talk about how that's going to be mixed in and around skills versus team versus tactics, sort of the balance. And then just perhaps touch on some of the things that under 13s may be giving you well, not I would say headaches, but giving you a few challenges to think about as the season progresses. Now, I think, and I will say this to all coaches at all age groups, I think we have sometimes a picture of what the game should look like, and it doesn't always turn into the game that it really does look like. Now, the first thing is that you will obviously have done the under-12s last year. How much does it change from under-12s to under-13s? Well, I think it does change quite a lot. This is probably the first time that the game will start to look more like what we imagine an adult game of rugby to look like. Now, I'm not saying we need to play adult rugby, but it looks more like rugby, the version of the game which we expect them to play. Not a lot like it, but certainly the first real inklings of perhaps a few phases of play. Plus the set piece allows us a little bit more chance to develop play, and we're going to come back to where that matters. Now, I think because of that, you need to create what I call a season momentum, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about blocks. And there's a seemingly enormous amount of work to be done in the season in terms of skill development, tactical play, building a team. I'm going to break it down into blocks. And what you'll see is my blocking is, let's think about what our team needs to look like in the first game. What should we be aiming to see in our first game? Then half term, then Christmas, and then the next half term. And depending on how your season works its way through, you're going to have a block of time maybe which will include some festivals. But let's use these as points where we say, let's see where we are when we get there, and let's work to those rather than trying to see what we're going to look like here. We don't want to be, this is where we're looking. This is not where we're looking. We want to be looking here first. Winning absolutely matters. It is a very important part of sport, but it matters in the right manner. And it matters in the sense that you don't go onto the pitch to lose games, but it's not about the result. And I'm suggesting, this is my suggestion, is that you have a discussion with your team and your coaches on what does winning look like for us. And it's a more sophisticated conversation than the win or loss at the end of the game. It is things that we can do that will say that we have improved that and we have won. It could be that you base it on results where you could be, so I'm just letting someone back in. It could be based on results from previous seasons. It could be looking at half time. What do we need to improve? Think about not necessarily completely measurable targets, but areas of the game that you think and the players think this is what we can do, which makes us feel that we've achieved something when we've played. Now, some of you may be washing away every single side that you come across, but most of us will have a balanced season or maybe a tough season ahead. Well, if that's the case, what's good? What's going to be good? What can we as a group decide to be good? And that's where player and team development comes into it. We've got to develop as a team, but we've got to develop as players as well. And they go hand in hand. For me, there's a big I in win. We've got to develop the individual to understand what their role is in the team. They can't rely on other players. What did you do differently? Now, if you are asking the player who's the worst tackler and the worst runner of the ball, what did they contribute? They've got to be saying to themselves, well, actually, I made a tackle that I don't normally make in this game. I made it to a ruck. I was the next player in the passing line, which we scored a try. So let's try and put a bit more emphasis on the individual to build towards what we define as winning. Now, you've probably pored over the new laws for next year and may well have asked coaches in the team above what the differences were. And for me, there are a few significant differences. First of all, in terms of the bigger pitch. Now, you may say, right, we need to focus on fitness. I would suggest that under 13s, if you talk about fitness quite a lot, you will turn off a number of players. So my suggestion is you downplay talking about fitness, but you use training to upgrade their game fitness. So it's not laps of the pitch, it's more, perhaps a bit more intensity in certain parts of it where the players are really pushed. Because some 13-year-olds can run all day, but a number of 13-year-olds or 12 to 13-year-olds, because there'll be 12 for most of the season, will be struggling to have that sort of anaerobic or aerobic fitness that we'd expect older players. I think the fly hacking allowed is nothing of consequence. This is the consequence, is the choice over scrums. You've got 6-player scrums. We're going to talk about scrummaging in a moment. You can push, but before the start of any game, you need to decide or recognize you have 6 willing and able players to scrummage. Now, you as a coach should have pretty close to 2/3 of your team able to scrummage. Now, that doesn't mean that they're willing to scrummage. They are able to scrummage because the benefits of being able to scrummage will feed through the rest of the game. The willing part, well, you can be a little bit sneaky. You arrive at the game and you see that you're up against a monster team and say, yes, we've got at least 6 people who are able, but looking at the other team, they're certainly not willing. Generally, I think that you'd want to try and scrummage as much as possible. It's obviously a safety issue. We'll come back to scrummaging in a moment. All right, just checking to see if anyone else needs to come in at this stage. So that's the key part. We'll talk a bit about the width of the pitch in a moment. Skills focus. Now, I've talked about blocks. I think that you need to have, by the first game of the season, the very basics of tackles in place. And you've probably coached tackling every year, but it's something you should go back to every week, every session. Now, the new tackle height laws probably won't affect our players so much because they're used to tackling a bit lower. However, the focus should be on tackling below the ball. That's number one. But also, in terms of practicing their tackle height, and there's lots, I'm building a set of resources on the website, is that the players should bend at the hips. So we're working on that, and that's not easy for all 12-year-olds. But also, there's this mistake, I think, that we suggest that the players get their foot inside this hula hoop. Now, if they do, they tend to overstretch, or they don't get this shin bend. So ideally, and I know I've quite got the scale, this shin should be pointing downwards. Get the knee pointing downwards, and that gets the height. The focus is on being exact, not being a negative about height. If the player gets it wrong, if we go into some sort of, and obviously he's someone in the news a little bit at the moment, we sort of Owen Farrell type terrifying negativity around tackle height. This is terrible, that sort of thing. We don't want to build that in the players. It should be positive. Get the tackle, you just need to be a bit lower, just be a bit lower. Don't talk about this will cause penalties, this is dangerous. Get yourself lower. Let's focus on the positive aspects of keeping low. Now, in the tackle stuff that I've been doing on the site, I've been saying focus on three things in particular. Number one for me is super tight grip. That's getting the head in very, very tight. That comes as number one. If you get your grip right, lots of other good things happen. And because we're focusing low and we get the grip right, we should then look at trying to keep ourselves active in the tackle. So that's leg drive. So that's number two on my list. And then number three on my list would be the footwork. Now, often we put footwork as first. Now, there's no harm in that. I'm not saying that there should be there's a definite order for everyone. I think you get the grip right first, and that means the players are focused at the right height. And once they've got the grip, they can then finish the tackle, and then the footwork, well, that would get them in a position to do that. I talked about scrum focus. I think you need to get as many players as you can to be able to scrummage. I don't say that they will need to scrummage in the game. Focus on profiles. I think in the warm-up, a couple of minutes every session, get as many players who are comfortable to play in the scrum as possible, even if they won't play in matches. So it's not saying to everyone you will play in the matches. We will work on it. Dan Cole, who played for England over the weekend, he was under 16s Leicestershire flanker. Ellis Genge, who came on England under 18s number 8. So there's plenty of players who will move through into the front row and players who will move backwards as well. Focus on getting the profiles right, and the profiles should be before and after contact. So get the players being bumped around. So we'll talk about that a bit in skills in the training. The contact focus is on getting players positive over the ball carrier. So when they've gone to ground. So the new tackle laws mean that evasion will be rewarded because the players will be able to get their hands free. But with their hands free means that they can pass the ball away. So have a hierarchy of contact. So the first one is pass before contact. The second one is pass out of contact. The next one is pass off the ground. And the third one is secure ball. You can't do any of these unless you work hard before contact. You don't give up on contact. A nice term I've picked up last week is we want to teach our players ball toughness. It's not saying that there's a new way of doing things, but it gives the idea that we want to not give up in the tackle. We want to be active, get good ball placement, and then the next player arriving at the ball, I see a lot. So if this is, say, we're playing this way, there's a play on the ground. I see a lot of players arrive and they go like this. They end up like that. So they're in this sort of sealing off position. And for me, that is not positive. We want to try and get these players to go through and be in this position beyond the ball, ready to move forward. So that would be a massive contact focus for me, being positive. And because we've got a wider pitch, we want to encourage a better rate of passing. And that means that I'm not saying this is how we line up in a training session, but let's say here are defenders. Instead of going to fix every single defender and then passing, this ball will unlikely get to this last player on the end here. Let's pass a bit earlier. Let's pass earlier and give this player the chance to do something. Yes, they've got to stay square, but let them pass a bit earlier. That leads to tactical focus. I don't think we want to spend too much time on tactics, trying to create what you might call a structure. This is not about structure. If you've got hours and hours with your players, maybe you can have some relatively sophisticated structure. But for me, you need to be able to have the players understand that if the ball is slow ball, if it's a slow ball at a ruck, we can get players lined up to attack, either playing off 9, but preferably playing off 10. But we don't want to get players. So I'm just going to do the ruck again. This is the problem I see. 10, 12, and then we have forwards here and here. Let's encourage the ball to get to 10 and to 12 and to play a little bit wider. So these players, yes, they will get involved, but they don't spend most of the time trucking up the ball. So you're going to have some scrums. You can have a bit more stability of the scrum. There's the scrum. The ball comes in from this side, let's say, so you're playing out to this side. Nothing too sophisticated off scrums. They've got some space. You don't have to be passing the ball behind these guys because these defenses won't be up. Simple plays. If you can get your players to do a switch, that's fantastic. In my 30 years, I've seen very few sides being able to do a switch effectively unless they've got 10 and 12 who are already very good players. So don't spend too much time on switches, just simple plays where 10 and 12 are getting the ball and they're attacking with that. Kicking is starting to become more of a feature. I think on kicking strategy, just speak to your kickers in the game, and there's not just one kicker, but anyone who's liked to kick a ball, and say, if we are here, what happens next? Let's start that conversation. Give them some ideas about choices. Kicking doesn't tend to be a very strong part of the game, but you can certainly get yourself out of a lot of trouble if you're in your own 22. We're certainly not looking for box kicks at this stage. We're looking for players to maybe just manipulate the defense a little bit. And the attack strategy, well, this is this bit here. Where do we want to play? And the difficulty is that you may say, oh, we've got a couple of quick wingers, we want to play them. We've got a couple of good forwards, we want to play with them. If we play too much to our strengths, we then reduce the chances for players to maybe develop other strengths. So attack strategy should be very simple, and it should be focused on, if the ball is very slow, what do we do? Otherwise, what do we do if we get fast ball? Notice I'm not spending any time on defense strategy. That is time well spent later in probably 14s or 15s. Let's just get tackling right, and lots of other things tend to fall into place if you're tackling well. So what does the shape of training look like? I think at least 5 minutes a week on scrum. Now you're going to also probably do that, and that's 5 minutes everyone, and then 5 minutes scrummaging. So lots of 1v1s. Start to develop 2v1s. So that is one player pushing against two. And then very carefully, but it is well worth trying to develop. So that is a 3v3, but notice that there's two people at the front here and one person at the front here. So we're starting to build up those connections of players. It's better to develop more players who can scrummage than spend spend more time on developing a 6-player scrum. And unless you've got large numbers, that could be your 6-4s you've got at the training session anyway. So there they are, developing some scrummaging profiles. Right, I'm going to jump over to skills. I talked about blocks, tackling. Week 1, let's focus on grip. Week 2, let's focus on leg drive. Week 3, let's focus on footwork. And then guess what? Repeat. So a couple of minutes on each. Handling. Let's get the rate of passing going. Let's get lots of passes in training. Let's put them under a bit of pressure. Let's get the ball moving as much as possible. And then in the contact skills, let's focus on ball toughness. In the first block, let's get our evasive actions right. So as players get to contact, first game, how many players ran straight into somebody? How many players actually were able to get to the side of a player? By half term, it could be that we've got superb or much better ball placement, and the first arriving player is very strong over the ball. That could be our wins. Yeah, every time we did have to take contact, our ball placement, we placed the ball 14 times and 12 times were excellent. The first arriving player was strong. We lost the ball 3 or 4 times, but that we can't help that. Sometimes we don't have the players in place. They're not fast enough. So we were still able to do that. But this is the thing which I think we need to fit in. Let's say you've got 90 minutes in the week. So warm-ups take out, say, 10. So that's 10. Skills, 20. Set piece, so maybe moving on, so 15. So that is, if I can add that, that's 45 with all the breaks. Play should be something around 30 minutes of that. Now, 15 minutes of this should be close to, depending on your surface, a full game. What I mean by a full game is that if you've got 13 players there, brilliant, let's play 13 aside. But it's unlikely. But let's take slices of the game and say, let's create a scenario. So we've got a 9v4, or say a 9v5 here. Let's start the game like it looks like. Just don't throw them the ball. Let's start with a tackle on the side of the box. Let's make this box 25 meters wide, or let's make it 40 meters wide. Let's make it very, very narrow. Let's make it very, very long. Let's create scenarios and play for 15 minutes and try and work out what's going on. And the other 15 minutes of play is exploring the skills. So again, creating some games and some activities where they are moving. Remember, I talked about fitness. Let's downplay it, but upgrade it. So we're upgrading it by playing it within a game. Under 13s. Split the season up. Let's have targets for the first game. Like a sprint, for those of you involved in goal setting and probably in technology, you'll know about sprints. Let's sprint to the first game, see where we are, and then decide what we want to get to by half term. And that's our focus. There's our wins. What have we achieved these things, and what are our games looking like? Games for fitness mean that we use movement under pressure more than S&C sorts of things for these guys. Some of them will be interested in it, but let's not make it the focus. This is a big turn off for players if they know that they've got to come to fitness. Some guys will be absolutely for it. I'm not underplaying fitness. I think it is part of the movement skills that you keep within the games. I think because you've got a wider pitch, yes, we might want to fix players in front of us with our running and passing, but let's just pass earlier. Let's not worry about the fact that we got the ball out wide, but we might have run out of space. We can deal with that later. What would be the greatest pity is if the first player took the ball up to the line and the ball never came out. And this is the problem you'll face. 12s, under 12s, there will be there'll be a couple of players who will dominate. And they will be the best players, and they will want to have their hands on the ball more often. And so your challenge would be to get them to be buying into this passing rate. And second touches on the ball is their wins. How many times did you touch the ball in this phase of play? There's an age-old story about one of the great Australian players, Mark Keller, who said, if I touch the ball once, we'll probably score. If I touch the ball twice, we will score. If I touch the ball 3 times, I score. Now, I love that because it means that he was looking for second touches. That's where you can say to a player, that's great. You passed, supported. And even if your touch, and one of my touches, I think for some players, touches is engagements in the game. Engagements in the game. And finally, with under 13s, because players are changing shapes so much, rotate as much as you can. Certainly, coaching with Mumbles, we rotated as much as we could through to under 15s. When I say as much as we could, there were some times where we had to choose a team for the competition win. Otherwise, it would be, let's say we've got 20 players there. Everyone had a number 1, 2, 3, all the way through to 20. So there was 13 players on the pitch. So 1 to 7 would be off the pitch, and then we would rotate like that. So we would just bring the next 7 players on after 5 minutes. Now, probably you've got other systems in play, but it meant that sometimes we had players who weren't our best scrum halves in position. And this is where, if you're going to focus on a position, 9 is a key position. Get as many 9s as you can in your team. You may have one brilliant 9. They can't be playing 9 all the time. They should be playing in other positions. And you need to be developing as many as possible, because there's going to be times he's got tonsillitis, or he's on a family trip away, and suddenly you haven't got players in place. Okay, I love under-13s rugby. It's a really exciting area of the game. It's exciting because, as I said, it's the time when it starts to look like the game of rugby. It's a chance for you to get some real wins from the things they do. And I mean, just overall, they are beginning to understand their physicality, which of course brings in its own joys. And yeah, you can look forward to under-14s and under-15s for that. Okay, so that's a real rattle through under-13s. And I'm just going to stick around now if anyone's got any questions. I'll put the recording up on the website. I'll put some links up to things that you can look at. But I'm always here for people to ask me questions, ask me what they can do, whether it's through here or in other things. So I think, David, you've got your hand up, so jump in. If that is indeed a hand up.
No, that was a round of applause.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. I enjoyed that. I wasn't too sure on my icons.
Hey Dan, it's Lawrence here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Lawrence. You're okay? You're on a train?
I've now just transitioned to the car, so I'm glad you can hear me. But honestly, this stuff's golden and very aligned with a lot of my thinking, but but also so much more as well. So thanks for all the ideas. Just one thing.
Yeah.
Got a couple of buddies in another team who last year under 12s started to put players into positions, and it was less to create specialties, but it was more to give the player an awareness of where they should be at a given time, which kind of made sense. How do you think that then transitions into under 13? Are we starting to talk about specific positions to help them know where to be on the pitch, as opposed to every ruck or everybody following the ball that they did at under 8s?
Right. Okay. Well, first, it's a constant thought that you need to be helping these players get better game awareness, and it's a massive challenge, because they won't be watching much rugby, so they won't. Not all of them be watching much rugby, so they won't have much awareness. So there's a couple of things to do. Now, the games themselves are great learning opportunities, and frankly, the more you play the games, the more that they understand. But you've got to be able to give them some guidance as well, without trying to give them too much, because when a player goes onto the pitch, they can hold a certain amount of information in their brain, and they can draw on some information from the past. Now, when they go into the game, if you start to then add in extra pieces of information, then it all becomes overloaded. So this is where training games are very good. So for example, I do a lot of games where, let's say, we'll play 6 versus 9. 6 versus 9. So we overload the attack. But I say that we nominate this player is always 9. This player here is always 10. Doesn't have to be your best 9, doesn't have to be your best 10, but it just means that if you go into a contact situation, this player goes into contact situation, Then the 9 will be in a position to pass the ball away, and then the players realign off 10. And that starts to give them the awareness. Now, the next thing is that you give them lives. And you say, this team here will have 3 lives to start off with. And once you lost your 3 lives, we'll swap over some attackers and defenders. If a 9 goes into the contact area, then you're going to lose a life because he's out of the game. If a 10 goes into contact, loses a life, he's out of the game. So these players will start to realign off 9 and 10. Then after maybe a couple of minutes, this guy's 9, this guy's 10. And then if the ball doesn't go from 9 to 10, they lose a life. So again, it just helps start to build their awareness. I talked about kicking strategy. Well, let's say that we give one of the players is allowed to kick. Only one player is allowed to kick. And when they kick, let's say they will retain possession if the ball goes at least 10 meters in distance and at least, say, 5 meters in the air. So now this player is starting to strategize about their kicking. Not anybody else, but this player. So just as you said, Lawrence, some of these players are starting to think about the game. And other players are starting to feed in. Now, 1 or 2 of you players will absolutely not want to be in this position. They'll absolutely hate it. So that's a bit of a management thought for you. Do I push this player? Do I want this player to have a go at first receiver? And then you could, if you've got more numbers, you can say, let's say you've got 12 versus 8. I have this player is 9, this player is 9. This is a first receiver. This is a first receiver. So I've got, and only the passes from only the 9 can clear from a ruck, and only the first receiver can be the first receiver. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to actually change it round and say there's no 9. It's up to you whether you want to have a 9 or not. But if we go into contact, let's say it's a touch. As soon as there's a touch, and whatever touch you play, the player goes to ground and someone clears over. But as soon as they touch the ground, they've got 3 seconds to get the ball away. So you've got 3 seconds to get the ball away once the player's gone to ground. Remember, I've got this overload, so the attacking side isn't down on numbers because they've got too many in. That 3 seconds means that the players have got to be far more aware of someone coming in to clear the ball away. Now, I think that the way that they do this is that you play the game for a bit and then you say, right, get yourselves into a group. You're going to have a huddle. And you've got one problem to solve. It's how to get the ball away in 3 seconds. And they may well, and we hope they come up with, we'll nominate a 9, or we've got to do this. But again, you're just putting them under pressure to come up with those ideas, and players may naturally fall into those positions. Or you might actually say, you've got someone who always plays 10. Guess what? You're going to be, you have to be the second receiver. That's the only time you're allowed to receive the ball. Or alternatively, if you are the first receiver, you lose a life if you don't get engaged twice. So you've got to pass the ball once, and you've got to engage twice. You've got to be engaged twice. Now it might be you're in the clear out. It might mean that you are the next support runner. So positionally,
love all those. Yeah, absolutely. And you just got me thinking, and that's the great thing about these. You're talking about kicking strategy. You could always put a player offside as well. So the kicker you nominate is playing heads up rugby. Those loads of things, but it's just great talking through this. Just gets the creativity juices going.
Yeah, see, so with the offside player, I would probably not use that so much. I'm just about to publish a really good game with an offside player, but it's not for that reason. So heads up rugby, you need to be looking for what you need to see in the game. Now, you're not looking for one of your players in front of you. You're looking for what? What are you looking for when you're playing heads up rugby? What are they trying to find? And that's what we got to reward them for. So if we said this kicker, if he kicks into a space and it lands on the ground, and he's kicked it at least 10 meters and 5 meters up in the air, he's rewarded for attacking that space. He has seen that space. If there's somebody running to that, well, we don't ever have players running there. That's heads up rugby should be heads up to see what we would see in the game. And that's the challenge for the players, is to create those scenarios. And I think it is a challenge. And for under 13s, let's try and make it look as much like the game as possible. That's my view on the challenges. Now, on just trying to think when it's going to be published. I think it's about 2-3 weeks' time. Got this great game from Jack Pattinson, where he does use a player in an offside position who you can pass to and to kick to, but it's not to play heads up rugby. It's to do with support and getting players to support that player. But that's a different one. But you're quite right. Nothing's off the table. Nothing's wrong. It's all ways of doing it. And the stuff I'm saying here is there's a couple of absolutes. You've got to do this. You've got to be safe. And I would say you probably want to try as many scrummages as possible. But everything else, these are ideas. As you say, Lawrence, it gets the creative juices thinking. And does it suit my team? Does it suit the number of assistant coaches or coaching group I've got? Does it suit our season? Those are the factors which will suggest whether you say, yeah, definitely got to use this, or not for me, or not for me yet, or never for me.
Thanks, Dan. I've got 2 points, if I may.
Yeah.
I was surprised about what you said about defence. I think my teams could really benefit from being being more organised in defence.
Okay.
I think you've got some players who have the fitness level and the game awareness to be in the right position. And this is a bit of a horrible thing to say, but then they are sometimes let down by players who aren't able to concentrate for long enough, or aren't able to get there, or aren't aware of where they should be. So I was thinking about focusing on that a bit. And then the other thing where we could be much more effective is in recycling the ball. And when we play against really, really good teams, and we've sometimes come up second best, is in rucking technique, by which I mean, really, I think good low rucking technique, and frankly, aggression in the ruck, going in hard and not standing there and kind of wrestling. So that kind of that aggressive rucking, low rucking technique is something that I need all our players actually to just get a bit more effective at. So that's the other thing you didn't mention that I think I will be focusing on quite a bit.
All right. Okay. So defense. Now, the reason why I said I wouldn't spend so much time on defensive organization is that it's a trade-off on all the other things. And I think you probably, in a sense, you've answered it in certain ways. So generally, certainly when I was working with, say, these Swansea schoolboys under 15s, we would go pretty much up to our first game without doing too much on defense. And then I would just have a quick defensive session saying, right, we need to stand, need to get our first 3 players in place, ABC, and then play from there. And what would then happen is when we got to, say, the 3rd or 4th game, we would have spent a bit more time on these positions, right? A's got this, B's got this, C's got this. So it is a trade-off. If you've got a little bit more time, I think you can spend time on it, and it does start to pay dividends. The difficulty with a defensive system is that it so much relies on fitness to maintain the integrity of it, because if you've got roles, players have got to then fill in, and you know that you've got 15 players, 5 will be super fit, super into it, 5 will be quite fit, understand rugby, and 5 will be there because they're there with their mates and all those sorts of things. And that's probably why I would spend a little less time. But you're right, you would get some benefits from doing that. Now, the recycled bit, yeah, absolutely. So if I go back to, well, not that one so much. Yeah, ball toughness.
Right.
This is where I think that you could get definitely spend time on in the contact focus, is get this hierarchy of contact right first. So the ball carrier is really tough. If they can pass the ball before contact, great. Now, as you recognize, that's not always going to be the case. So we're going to be in contact, and the final thing is we've got to be able to secure ball. So that starts with the ball carrier, and quite often, and sadly, I do watch a lot of YouTube and watching these games, these age groups, and I see that a lot of ball carriers will, as soon as they got tackled, that's it. They've stopped. They crumple and they're not very effective. So this is why the ball placement. I think I said in one of the blocks, yeah, ball placement by half term. It's superb. You've got it exactly right. And on the website, I've got some stuff around ball placement and the best ball placement. And then the next one is the strong over the ball. Now, let's go over back onto here. This is quite a controversial area. So the best ball placement probably is what I saw: score a try and then jackknife back. So that's probably what the best ball placement will look like in the end. This guy here playing this way, trying to get the ball back to their team. The long placement is fine, but it's very difficult to do, and means that in order to do it, you're giving up all that distance, and also there's weak. So we got the strong ball placement. It's the next arriving player, and you've identified it yourself. The difficulty is they don't always arrive aggressively enough, and part of the problem is that often players think that so there's the ball, and they'll often end up in this sort of position here over the ball carrier. I'm not sure if you can sort of get my sort of picture. There's the ball carrier, place the ball back, and they're resting on the body. Now, it's okay. It's well, technically it's illegal, but a lot of sites do it. So I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about the legality, because we could argue about that. But what happens is the momentum stopped. Now, about 1 million years ago, when I did physics, I didn't do GCSE, O levels, something along the lines of F equals ma, and the trouble is, if you're static and stopped here, any player who arrives, if they're the same weight as you, will have a very good chance of knocking you backwards. So this is why at the Bears in particular, we have a real strong emphasis on the first arriving player to actually go past the ball, and then the next player to arrive at. So the first player's gone past the ball, so they've got momentum. The next player gets to the ball and they're over the ball in a strong position like this, facing forward, scrum profile, ready to come forward. So if someone does come towards them, if this player is arriving like this, I'm trying to make them look like they're moving forward, enormous feet moving forward. This player is ready to come forward to meet them. Now, the thing here is to try and encourage players to come into the right height, and that's why I said in these games here, you can set scenarios to play this, and you can play some very intense games.
Yeah.
And I've said 9v5 there. You could play say 9v6 and 6 attackers, and they've got their targets to retain the possession for 3 phases. Well, flip that would exercise them, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
in a small area.
in a small area.
Yeah.
And actually, it's amazing that that there's some of the things that they enjoy the most in a small area, where they are lumping into each other to a certain extent, but not from miles away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's lots of rotations. It's a bit like a Shark Tank. Not every player's in. It's quite tiring. So you could have say like a 6v4 with say 5 players waiting, and then they're next in, and they're sort of keen to get in.
Yeah, great.
I mean, but
Cool.
Paul, you come back to me again on this. We revisit it. And whereabouts are you based?
We're Old Alanians, which is South London.
Oh yes, I know.
Village.
So yeah, so yes, just trying to think when I'm around in that part of the world. But anyway, just keep coming back to me on this, and let's see what we can do, because I can tell you now, I don't know if anyone else is on the line will say this, but this is a question which comes back to me a lot. How can I get my players more aggressive in the ruck and better at the ruck? And it is an ongoing situation. You can guess there's no magic bullet. It just takes time. But that's why I'm saying set stuff up in blocks.
Yeah.
What can we get right first? Does that sort of start to answer the question?
Yeah, it's very helpful. I totally agree on the defense thing. We really don't. We haven't spent much time on it at all. And when you described what you would do, that I thought that's probably exactly what we will end up doing. And almost because we haven't spent much time on defense, I've kind of thought to myself over the summer, do you know what? I think we could make a real impact and progression if we do. But it's quite boring as well, isn't it? And I think you're right. I think you kind of feed it in at key times when needed. It's probably best.
Yeah, the thing is that defensive drills can look fantastic. Actually, you can look very, very good in defense in training, because you can run up and back against bags and you can get yourself organized. When it comes to the game, one of the hardest things in the game is contact fitness, where you get players to do 2 or 3 down and ups, and they're shattered. I mean, I'm speaking of personally, I'm always shattered, but
that's the thing. And coaches don't understand. Coaches who haven't played in certain positions don't realise and don't remember how difficult and scary it is. Yeah. That's another subject.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the challenges is working with other coaches to develop. I mean, there are other things in here, and this is obviously we haven't got time to go through it now, but you've got to have some form of, the jargon is some form of shared mental model. And in simple terms, that means that you're using language which everybody in the team understands what it means and can action on it. Otherwise, what happens is that one coach will say one thing, another coach will say another thing, and then the players and the coaches are confused, and therefore it starts to fall apart. Now, in a fantastic coaching environment, you are spending time in meetings discussing stuff, and then planning it, reviewing video, and then coming to training with a sophisticated system, which you can then, the number of players. But the reality is probably 5 or 6 WhatsApp messages fired back and forth, coaches arriving, and you're not quite sure who's there and who's not. And so, that's difficult, even with the best will in the world. So hence why I try more and more to make it as simple as possible in terms of the language.
Yeah.
So everybody is on the same page. And at the moment, the challenge I'm having with the girls for this year is to try and reduce the amount of language that we use, because we have such a lot of new players, and they'll arrive and we'll say 4 or 5 bits of jargon and immediately they're lost. And that's hard. And you'll have new players coming through, I would hope. You might have 1 or 2 new players this year, and they've got to learn the OA's language.
Yeah, well, I think
I'm just trying to think. Isn't Lawrence Boyle at Alderley?
Yeah. We're very lucky to have him. He's great. Yeah, we've got a huge year group. I've got 3 teams in the Kent League, and about 60 players on a Sunday. So
all right. So when I said run scenarios with 5 versus 6, probably thinking
I was like,
well, no, I could play 15, 12 versus 12.
I did actually. It's exactly what I thought. Yeah. So, but it brings different challenges. But we've got a lot of coaches as well.
Good.
So
That's great.
We're lucky. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, you passed my best on to Lawrence. I mean, I played with him about 1,000 years ago, but he was a much better player than I was. So
he's a good guy. He's a good guy. I'm going to get in trouble, so I'm going to go downstairs and have my dinner. But thank you.
Okay.
And good luck to everybody for the rest of the season.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.
Okay, folks, I'm sticking around if anyone else wants to ask any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to turn off. Tristan, by the way, thank you very much for noting that I didn't put the time in there. So I think people would have worked it out. But it's much better to say.
All right, thanks, man.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. That was probably me that missed it. That was all.
No, I definitely didn't. I triple checked. I hadn't. So thank you.
No worries. No, thank you. It's interesting, thoughts on how. I think probably the biggest thing I've kind of taken there is actually thinking around the blocks of the season in terms of building things up, which is really good to think about. And a lot of the themes you've mentioned actually align to some of the things that kind of come from the ERCA that I've done this year, and then over the summertime gone to one of the Tackle Height RFU courses, and similar things around evasion. Getting on the front foot over the ruck situation, and focusing on tackle and doing an awful lot more. And this is my downfall of being an ex-player, of doing the focus on drill rather than skill, and also kind of limiting probably people's exploratory, let them explore. Do you know what I mean? Rather than trying to give solutions. And so that's one of the things for me this year, is to put more open gameplay into our sessions, so that they kind of explore the scenarios through some structure, but they explore the scenarios a bit.
Yeah, I think the danger is that we end up playing all games and the players don't have enough time to try things out, probably in a much narrower circumstance. So a good drill can be as powerful as a good game, because you give them chances to do things. But you're right, they've got to then explore it. So you give them something that they then got to use. It's like when someone in a video game learns how to use a headshot in Call of Duty. They don't want to wait for 4 hours until they use that shot. They want to try and use it straight away and see how they can use it in what circumstances. And that I think is the challenge for coaches, is to know when to let them off the leash. But also one of the big things that I talk about now on courses is let's go to the last page, is this word here. And my thought is, don't talk about chaos. That's what actually causes problems for lots of players, because you don't learn in chaos because you're just trying to survive. What you do learn is when you have enough difficulty. You're motivated to improve because you improve. But if it's so chaotic that you've got no idea what's going on, it's so scary that you just need to create, as you say, as the RFU says, give them chances to explore where they have a little bit more difficulty than they've faced before.
Yeah.
So we don't throw a 9-year-old into a game of 15 aside because it's too chaotic. We put them into it's 7 aside, I think, at that age, and even with these guys now, they're at 13 aside because we're just creating a little bit more difficulty, a bit wider pitch. So yeah, you're right. This is exciting. I mean, and I think the tackle height courses have been. I've heard reports on them. I wasn't able to get to them, but I think they're helping us focus a little bit more on the detail.
Yeah, and thinking around evasion rather than taking the tackle on, which is what we did. Well, there was a bit. So this year, obviously, they can push in the scrums. Obviously, I wonder if it's going to be like a bit of a, having not coached with under 13s before, I thought that might start becoming a bit of a tactic almost for some of the teams to use. I know we've particularly got a team that have got some defined shapes at this age, you know what I mean, and probably a bigger team, and actually they might start to use it to get a little advantage and nudge of winning the ball. Do you know what I mean? But is that something that you haven't looked at or not done or don't advise on?
Well, I think there's an opportunity cost in spending time on scrummaging.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important that, as I say, as many players as possible learn the roles of the scrum. I mean, there's some players who are just never going to be there in a month of Sundays, but other players, it's worth them learning it now, even if they're not going to scrummage in the game. The push distance is about the best way to say it's the length of your front row. So you can't be pushed more than the length of your front row.
No.
So there's going to be some teams who are going to maybe focus on winning that set piece ball a bit more. But if you can get technically good, you can win your ball, and then you may lose the push, but you still get the ball. So that's fine. But as I said earlier on, you're starting to think tactically, but is it something where we're talking about the winning part? Is it a win that you are focused on? Do we want to? We've got a bit of a bigger team. Let's try and win some scrums. Great.
Yeah.
And you know what wonderful for these guys, and it's they may say we're enjoying winning this, but if you only got 2 players that are saying that and 13 players who aren't, then you're going to have to say, right, we're going to spend some time on this scrums, but actually we've also got to spend a bit of time on some of the other stuff as well.
Yeah. Number one is obviously securing your own ball, isn't it? And then the rest is after that, really. But no, that's good. Thank you. Interesting. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, well, Tristan, just drop me a line anytime if you've got any more questions, and